All right, this is stunning. 1 year ago, Kamala Harris made a very specific prediction to Donald Trump's face that is now coming perfectly true. I think we all need to bring more attention to the fact that Kamala made multiple very salient predictions that are manifesting perfectly into reality. And it's not because she's some sort of geopolitical genius who knows everything about Russia. It's because anybody with critical thinking skills can see that Donald Trump will get eaten for lunch by Vladimir Putin. He is getting eaten for lunch by Vladimir Putin, as Kamala Harris says. But there's one more prediction she makes throughout this clip that is very specific and has also come true over the past 24 hours. Kamala Harris brings up the fact that after Russia continues to wage their war in Ukraine, they will test the limits of NATO by attacking Poland. Whether it's through drones or direct attacks, Kamala says they will then push the limits into Poland, and you will do nothing, Donald Trump. Well, 1 year later, that is exactly what is happening. 24 hours ago, Poland shot down multiple drones over their territory, and they're calling it Putin testing the West. So he's doing exactly what Kamala Harris predicted both Putin and Trump would do. These are two rather predictable actors when you know how they think and what their intentions are, but Donald Trump can't read Putin. Yet Putin can read Donald Trump. So what Putin's doing is testing the NATO alliance, testing the durability of these Western leaders, and really it does go downstream to Donald Trump. What will the leader of the United States do as we actually fly drones into Poland or Polish territory? That is what Vladimir Putin is asking, and thus far, we've seen a weak-ass response from the United States. NATO and countries in Europe, of course, understand the risk. They're over there. They have Russia looming over them. But Trump, on the other hand, still doesn't understand how things are escalating. We're going to break this down in just one moment. But before we dive into the Poland and Russia of it all, before we dig into Russia's insane actions, I do want to pause for a moment on a piece that Kamala Harris actually released this morning in The Atlantic. It's called The Constant Battle. And it's a really interesting excerpt from her book, 107 Days, that details the 107 days from the moment Biden dropped out to the moment the November election happened. Now, I'm not going to read the full article. You can find it in The Atlantic, and I'll link it below as well. But there are a few excerpts from this that are going super viral because Kamala Harris gives some insight into how the Biden admin ran, how her campaign was treated, how she viewed her campaign. And it's pretty critical of Biden, but also is wrapped up in a bunch of respect. She loves Biden. She's very grateful. She thinks he was a great president. But now we get a little bit more insight into the way that our party works, and it really does expose some major flaws. The Democratic Party has this bad habit of making people wait their turn rather than elevating the best voices. The Democratic Party has some communication flaws that hurt new voices from coming up. There are so many hierarchical structures in the Democratic Party that need to be torn down. You see it right now with Zoran. So many people are scared in the Democratic Party. So many leaders are nervous to endorse Zoran Mamdani. By the way, we interviewed him before he was even the primary winner. We interviewed him months and months back. I've been a longtime supporter. But that's because we can actually recognize talented voices and elevate them. The point is, let's read this excerpt. So it starts off, Biden was about to give a speech after he dropped out, and Kamala Harris is meeting with emergency workers for a hurricane. It says, "In my life, I've seen over and over that it is often the people with the least who give the most. As I shook hands and thanked the police and emergency workers one by one, in each I saw a hero, the kind of person who answered a calling with a sense of duty of the well-being of people they've never met. A reporter in the press pool shouted a question about Biden's upcoming speech. It was just after 5 p.m. in Houston. The president would be addressing the nation from the Oval Office later that evening. I watched it at the hotel that night. It was a good speech, drawing on the history of the presidency to locate his own place within it. But as my staff later pointed out, it was almost 9 minutes into the 11-minute address before he mentioned me. And there we see the flaws beginning to pop up. Biden only mentioned Kamala once. Quote, I want to thank our great Vice President Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner to me and leader for our country. And that was it. 11-minute speech, he mentioned her once 9 minutes in. She says, I'm a loyal person. During all of those months of growing panic, should I have told Joe to consider not running? Perhaps, but the American people had chosen him before in the same matchup. Maybe he was right to believe they would do so again. He was, by some measures, the most consistently underestimated man in Washington. He'd been right about his tactics for pushing his agenda through a resistant Congress. it was just possible he was right about this too. And then Kamala points out, of all the people in the White House, I was in the worst position to make the case that he should drop out. I knew it would come off to him as incredibly self-serving if I advised him not to run. He would see it as naked ambition, perhaps as poisonous disloyalty, even if my only message was, hey, don't let the other guy win. Quote, it's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that, like a mantra, as if we'd been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness, says then Vice President Kamala Harris. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego or an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. Now, many people spin up a narrative of some big conspiracy at the White House to hide Joe Biden's infirmity. Here's the truth as I lived it, says Kamala Harris. Joe Biden was a smart guy with long experience and deep conviction, able to discharge the duties of president. On his worst day, he was more deeply knowledgeable, more capable of exercising judgment, and far more compassionate than Donald Trump on his best. But at 81, Joe got tired. That's when his age showed in physical and verbal stumbles. I don't think it's any surprise the debate debacle happened right after 2 back-to-back trips to Europe and a flight to the West Coast for a Hollywood fundraiser. I don't believe it was incapacity. If I believed that, I would have said so. As loyal as I am to President Biden, I am more loyal to my country. And you know, that is a very valid calculation. I think that President Biden, in retrospect, it's of course easier to analyze this a year later, but we should have had some form of primary, anything to prevent what is happening in this Trump era. But it says, I was well aware of my delicate status. Lore has it that every outgoing chief of staff always tells the incoming president's chief of staff rule number 1, watch the VP. Because I'd gone after him over busing in the 2019 primary debate, I came to the White House with what we lawyers call a, quote, rebuttal presumption. I had to prove my loyalty time and time again. When Fox News attacked me on everything from my laugh to my tone of voice to whom I dated in my 20s or claimed I was a DEI hire, the White House rarely pushed back with my actual resume. 2 terms elected district attorney, top cop in the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, senator representing 1 in 8 Americans by being a California senator. Lorraine Voles, my chief of staff, constantly had to advocate for my role at events. Quote, she's not going to stand there like a potted plant. Give her 2 minutes of remarks. Have her introduce the president. And I don't want to turn this into something it isn't, but it seems to me like the first female vice president still suffered from a lot of the things that females, go through in every workplace, which is having trouble advocating when there's a male-dominant environment of people who are constantly, being condescending or acting like you should just stand there and look pretty. That's what people used to say, or they still say that. So it's weird that this same sort of thing seems to have manifested. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but my mom talks a lot about women in the workplace and how it's an uphill battle to advocate for yourself and to be on the same page when men are always acting in a certain way. So it seems like, quote, she's not going to stand there and look like a potted plant. Give her 2 minutes of remarks. So they had to advocate for her. Quote, they had a huge comms team. They had Karine Jean-Pierre briefing the press from every day, but getting anything positive said about my work or my defense against untrue attacks was almost impossible. An example, in 2021, I was dispatched to the Elysee Palace to help reset our tattered relationship with France after we signed an Australia-UK-US security pact. Australia had agreed to buy submarines from France, but scrapped the contract when we and the UK agreed to supply Australia with nuclear subs. This had caused tremendous friction. In our meeting, Macron and I warmed the chill by focusing on our many areas of cooperation, such as space exploration, climate change, transatlantic security, cybersecurity, the Indo-Pacific. On that trip, I was invited to the renowned Pasteur Institute. She says, I was speaking to the scientists there informally about how I wish politicians would follow the scientific method, testing a hypothesis and adjusting according to results rather than coming in with the plan. And Kamala said, the plan, with exaggerated air quotes and emphasis in this clip. So Fox News, the New York Post, Newsmax, everyone went wild, claiming she faked a French accent because she said the plan, like that, like the plan, like she emphasized it. That was total nonsense. But the White House seemed glad to let the reporting about my gaffe overwhelm the significant thaw in foreign relations I'd achieved. Worse, I often learned that the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprang up about me. One narrative that took a stubborn hold was that I had a chaotic office and unusually high staff turnover in my first year. Okay, so I could read more about this. I didn't really just want to make a full video focused on this because there are so many important things in the news cycle, such as the Epstein cover-up, such as Russia and Ukraine, and now Poland and NATO, such as Gaza or, Medicaid being stripped. There are so many important things, but this is an interesting insight into the Democratic Party and into the way these things work. Let me know what you guys think about that, but let's return to this. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk on Wednesday said the country's military had shot down Russian drones and entered its airspace during an attack on western Ukraine. The incident marks the first time a NATO member has directly engaged Russian assets, but Russian assets were in the airspace in the first place, which is wild. So there was an unprecedented violation of NATO treaties as Russian drones flew through the territory. Donald Trump has said nothing. 1 year ago, Kamala Harris called this exact thing out.
Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Okay, Trump smiles there, but everything she said has come true perfectly. Vladimir Putin has eaten Donald Trump for lunch since day one, even before that. But they've done all of these phone calls, all of these meetings, and Trump has gotten zero concessions. In fact, Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has conceded all of these little things. So when Donald Trump asked Zelensky and Putin to agree to plans or frameworks, Zelensky has agreed to every single one. He agreed to some shitty mineral deal earlier on in the presidency after getting yelled at. He still signed the mineral deal because he said, look, I want to be good faith. Here's a signature. You can have your mineral deal. Then Zelensky put down his arms for a 30-day ceasefire. Putin didn't. Putin decided to violate that. Then Zelensky got ready for a meeting. They were going to do a meeting. Putin never showed. Putin never showed to the meeting. And then during the Red Carpet Summit, they were going to have a ceasefire. Zelensky is down. He's always down. They want to stop the fighting. Putin said, no, let's continue the fighting. Let's keep going. After Putin said no, he bombed the hell out of Ukraine. A friend of the show, Luke Beasley, was over there covering it. And this was due to Donald Trump. Luke Beasley had bombs dropping around him and the rest of Ukrainian cities because Donald Trump continued to delay and delay and delay. It's not just Trump. It's Putin using this negotiation as a delay tactic and Trump falling for it face first. So yes, he did get eaten for lunch, but now it's escalating even further. What Putin does is he tries to grab a monopoly on the escalatory rhetoric. What that means is he wants to be the only one who can escalate and who can say crazy things. If anyone else escalates or says any sort of threat, he will clutch his pearls and shriek and say, are you trying to start a war? We don't want to start a war. But then he's the one that can have a monopoly on this escalatory rhetoric. Like Poland shot down Russian drones, and that was a clear stress test of the NATO alliance. Are we going to respond? How are we going to respond? And I say we do. I think it's just about time we slap these people across the face. And I'm talking about Russia. The Russian regime needs to be smacked across the face, smacked upside the head, and Europe needs to be the one doing it. We need to inflict maximum pain on Vladimir Putin. That's the only way to stop this, or else he will continue to be emboldened. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and peace out.